He was a monster hiding in plain sight. Bournemouth murder nobody saw coming. 12th March 2022, Saturday, 4:44 a.m., Bournemouth town. He was a hero, a young man trying to keep the peace with his whole life ahead of him. His killer? A wanted double murderer who tricked the British government into believing he was a 14-year-old schoolboy. This is the story of how the system failed and how an innocent man paid the highest price imaginable. The victim and background. Thomas Roberts was 21 years old. He lived in Bournemouth, worked full-time as a precision engineer, and had recently begun training for a future in the Royal Marines. He wasn't just considering the idea, he was committed. Friends and family described him as someone with focus, discipline, and a clear sense of direction. Outside of work, his passion was music. He DJ'd under the name Nomad and played at local events. He wasn't chasing recognition. He simply loved the music. For him, it was a way to unwind and stay connected with his friends. His life wasn't chaotic or unstable. He had a long-term girlfriend, steady work, and plans for the future. Those who knew him said he had a calm way of handling situations. He didn't raise his voice or act impulsively. If people around him lost control, he'd stay composed. He was the sort of friends turn to when things got heated, not because he was intimidating, but because he could bring things back down. There was no pattern of violence in his life. He had no criminal record, no involvement in anything that would have put him at risk. On the night it happened, he'd been out in town with a close friend. We will talk about it later in this video, but he didn't know the man they came across. There was no history between them, no argument that had carried over from earlier in the night. Everything that unfolded happened within moments of that brief encounter. One thing is sure, he hadn't planned to get involved in anything or wasn't out looking for trouble. He stepped forward because something didn't feel right, and that decision made in seconds cost him his life. Defendant's background. Langjin Abdul Rahima Zai entered the UK in December 2019. He arrived at the port of Poole and claimed asylum, telling officials he was a 14-year-old orphan from Afghanistan, fleeing the Taliban. And that was enough. No birth certificate, no proof of who he was. That claim was accepted without formal challenge. He was placed into the care of social services as a minor. In reality, he was an adult. The court later confirmed he was born on September 7, 2001, making him 18 at the time he arrived. The lie went unchallenged for years. There were no biometric checks, no age assessment, no effort to verify his identity through European databases. And without those checks, no one in the UK knew that Abdul Rahimi was already wanted for a double murder. In Serbia, 2 Afghan men had been shot dead with a Kalashnikov rifle following a dispute over human smuggling. Abdul Rahimi was named as the gunman, but he fled the country before he could be arrested. In his absence, a Serbian court tried and convicted him, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. He later traveled through Norway, where he was also convicted of a violent offense, then to Italy, where he was caught dealing drugs. He used different identities along the way. Once in Britain, the pattern continued. He was placed with a foster family and enrolled in secondary school and treated as a vulnerable refugee child. At one point, he was living alongside children as young as 11. His behavior quickly raised concerns. He became known for aggressive outbursts and paranoia. But concerns began to surface. Like teachers noticed violent outbursts, foster carers described him as aggressive and unpredictable, and prone to emotional swings. On social media, he posed with long knives and machetes. images later shown in court. When questioned, he said it was just for show, to gain followers. And just 2 days before the killing, a shop assistant reported seeing him with a machete. Police were informed. Officers tried to attend his home, but didn't get access. No warrant was issued, no further action taken. Each agency, immigration, police, social care, had part of the picture, but no one joined the dots. He was still seen by social services as a vulnerable teenager. No one knew he had killed before, and no one realized he was on the brink of doing it again. The confrontation. It was just before 4:44 a.m. on the 12th of March, 2022. Bournemouth Town Center was quiet. The pavements were nearly empty. Thomas Roberts and his friend James Medway had picked up some food and were walking past a Subway shop on Old Christian Church Road when they saw an e-scooter left outside. They were only there for a moment. James noticed the scooter and made a passing comment. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but a man nearby took issue. That man was Langjin Abdul Rahimai. He was convinced they were trying to take it. The exchange was brief, quiet, but his body language was tense and confrontational. According to CCTV and witness statements, he became visibly agitated. Thomas stepped in. He didn't know Abdul Rahimai. They'd never met before, but when he saw the situation starting to turn, he moved between them. He put himself in the middle. It was something those who knew him said he often did, stepping in calmly when things got heated. According to the court, he tried to de-escalate. He gestured with his arms, creating space between his friend and the man facing them. At some point, he reached out and made contact, a single slap, open-handed, not an attack, but a barrier. He likely didn't see the knife. The blade Abdul Rahimai was carrying had been hidden in the waistband of his trousers, 2 pairs layered, one over the other. In an instant, he stepped forward and stabbed Thomas twice. One strike punctured his chest, the other went straight through the heart. The attack lasted seconds. CCTV later confirmed it was over in less than 30 seconds. No warning, no fight. Just a brief pause, then sudden fatal violence. Thomas collapsed on the pavement. His friend tried to catch him as he fell. Realizing what had happened, James took off after the attacker. Paramedics were called immediately. He was rushed to hospital and taken into emergency surgery. By the time his family were told what had happened, he was already in critical condition. He died the following day, on the 13th of March, 2022. A calm intervention had turned, without warning, into something irreversible. Fleeing the scene. As Thomas Roberts lay bleeding on the pavement, Langjin Abdul Rahimai disappeared into the shadows. Of Horseshoe Common, what happened next was pieced together by detectives in the days that followed. A series of steps taken not out of panic, but method. After fleeing across open ground, Rahimai dug a hole beside some bushes and buried the knife. Back at the home where he was living under foster care, he destroyed what he could. He burned the Afghan flag scarf he had been wearing that night, along with other items of clothing. Investigators believe he tried to eliminate anything that might carry blood or trace evidence. But one thing he couldn't destroy and didn't realize he had lost was his phone. It had slipped from his pocket during the struggle and landed near Thomas's body. Officers found it at the scene. Cracked screen, blood-stained casing. That single item cut through every lie he had told. It didn't just confirm his presence, it identified him. The handset was linked to his foster placement, school records, and social media accounts. Through that one device, detectives had a name, an address, and a digital trail leading back months. Within days of the murder, the full manhunt was over, but the investigation had only begun. Everything the police were about to uncover, from the Serbian convictions to his fake identity, would come to light because of one dropped phone and one buried knife still waiting in the trees. UK crime investigation. By the time officers arrived at the scene, the first pieces of the puzzle were already in place. Forensics moved quickly. CCTV from nearby shops was recovered within hours. Witnesses were interviewed and search teams began sweeping the surrounding areas, including the grass and tree lines of Horseshoe Common. What they uncovered in those first few days confirmed what had only begun to surface. A knife buried in the undergrowth, a phone was found near Thomas's body. Both items would prove crucial. The weapon matched the fatal wounds, the phone already linked to a name and image, as we discussed earlier. Armed with that evidence, police moved in. Abdul Rahimi was arrested at the home where he had been living under foster care.
As previously mentioned, he didn't resist. When officers arrived to arrest him, he was still carrying a second phone, one he had continued using after the attack. That device was also tied to several of his TikTok profiles, many of which featured him posing with knives and weapons, which were now backed by hard forensic evidence. But it was the European alerts that shifted the investigation into something far more complex. Through Interpol, detectives accessed his record from Serbia, Norway, and from Italy, each tied to a different name, but eventually all pointing to the same individual. Investigators also began cross-checking gaps in the UK system. As noted earlier, no necessary measures were taken before he entered the country. What started as a local murder case had turned into something else, a breakdown of safeguards across borders, in a question that now hung over the entire case. How had no one stopped him sooner? Family reactions over UK murder case mystery. For mother Dolores and stepfather Peter Wallace, the grief was compounded by silence. In the months that followed their son's death, they waited for answers. None came. The Home Office launched an internal inquiry into how a convicted double murderer entered the UK posing as a teenage orphan. But no one from the department contacted the family. No explanation or apology. According to Peter Wallace, not even a phone call. They only found out about the Serbian double murder 1 week before the trial began, a detail they were asked to keep to themselves. And when Abdul Rahim Zai was sentenced to life with a minimum of 29 years, the Wallaces were left to face the reality that the system hadn't just failed, it had let their son's killer walk in, lie, and blend into normal life. At one point, Peter Wallace said he held the Home Office responsible for Tommy's death, believing that if someone had simply done their job, his stepson would still be alive. Whereas Dolores described it as a preventable tragedy and a national disgrace. In her words, the immigration system was broken. She questioned how someone could claim to be a child, be placed in school alongside 11-year-olds, carry a knife, and still be ignored. Later, Peter also added that he was a loaded cannon and didn't go looking for Tommy. He was just waiting to kill someone. Their frustration wasn't limited to border failures. They pointed to the lack of urgency from schools, social services, and police, all of whom had raised concerns but failed to act. But beyond personal grief, their fear is wider. How many more like him are still in the system? Dolores warned that asylum processes need reform, not to punish those genuinely in need, but to prevent another family from going through what they have. They've since supported MP Tobias Elwood's call for an independent inquiry, and they've asked for something lasting, a memorial bench at Horseshoe Common where Thomas fell, a place to remember him and a reminder of what went wrong. Government response. The Home Office launched an internal review, not a public one, not shared with the family, not open to scrutiny. After everything that came to light, the government chose to keep its findings sealed. Members of Parliament, including Tobias Ellwood, called for transparency. They asked for the report to be published. That request was denied. What followed added to the frustration. It later emerged that in 2021, a year before the murder, Abdul Rahim Zai had been referred to the PREVENT program, the UK's counter-terrorism scheme. Someone had flagged concerns that he was at risk of radicalization, but no action was taken, no follow-up, no intervention, and no record of the referral triggering meaningful oversight. For the Roberts family, it raised a deeper question. How many times does someone need to be flagged before action is taken? They had already been told that social workers were concerned, that the school had acted, that neighbors had noticed erratic, sometimes threatening behavior. But every agency appeared to be working in isolation, and at no point did the system connect the dots. When the case reached the coroner's office, there was hope that a full inquest might bring clarity. The legal threshold for such an inquiry under Article 2 of the Human Rights Act is clear. If the state knew or should have known about a real and immediate risk to life, an inquest is required. But in this case, the coroner ruled otherwise. There would be no Article 2 hearing, no jury, no systemic feelings found, only a written determination, one that it breached. To the family, it felt political, a decision not rooted in fact, but in damage control. They said the process seemed designed to protect institutions, not expose them. And what they were left with, more than a year on, was silence. No apology, no accountability, and still no answers. Trial and sentencing. The trial began in January 2023. By then, nearly a year had passed since Thomas's death, and the full scale of what had gone wrong had already started to come into view. But now, in the courtroom, the focus narrowed to one question. Was it murder or manslaughter? The prosecution said it was clear-cut. Thomas hadn't attacked and threatened. He had tried to stop a situation escalating and paid for it with his life. The entire incident had lasted just 24 seconds. That's what the jury was told. 24 seconds between a calm intervention and 2 fatal wounds. Prosecutors also confirmed all the evidence and revelations that we have already discussed, as he had a long-standing history of violence. But in court, he claimed something different. He admitted to carrying the knife, he admitted to using it, but he said he hadn't intended to kill, that he feared for his life, that the stabbing was instinct, not aggression. The jury didn't agree. On the 23rd of January 2023, after 2 weeks of evidence, they delivered a majority verdict: guilty of murder. Judge Paul Dugdale described the killing as senseless. In seconds, you took the life of a thoroughly decent man with a bright future, who was loved greatly by so many people. Your momentary act of extreme, senseless violence has left a family with a tragic loss that they will feel for the rest of their lives. He called Thomas a peacemaker, someone who stepped in to stop harm and became the victim of it. He was sentenced to life in prison, a minimum term of 29 years, before parole could even be considered.
Conclusion. What do you make of this video? Let us know in the comments below. If you want more real UK immigration and visa updates, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. See you in the next video.